If you ever need a wife for exactly 6 months, call this number, the note said. Ethan Caldwell almost threw it away. The city of Manhattan stretched below the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, a glittering grid of headlights and office towers glowing against the winter night. 43 floors above Fifth Avenue. Everything in Ethan's world looked controlled, calculated, predictable. That was how a CEO survived. Numbers made sense. Contracts made sense. People rarely did. Especially not tonight. On the glass conference table behind him lay a stack of legal documents and a single ultimatum from the board of directors of Caldwell Group. If Ethan didn't prove personal stability within 48 hours, the controlling shares his late father left him would automatically transfer to the board's temporary management committee. In simpler terms, he would lose the company he had spent the last decade building. The reason was absurd, but the board had been waiting for leverage. Investors wanted a family man leading the company, someone who looked dependable on magazine covers, someone married. Ethan exhaled slowly and ran a hand through his dark hair. Marriage had never been part of the plan. Not after what happened 3 years ago. Not after trusting someone who loved his last name more than she loved him. The city hummed faintly below, distant horns echoing like a reminder that time was running out. On the table, his assistant had left a small white envelope with that strange handwritten note and a phone number. No name. No explanation. Just the sentence about a wife for 6 months. It sounded ridiculous, the kind of offer that belonged in a bad romantic comedy, not in the life of a CEO whose calendar was scheduled down to the minute. And yet, Ethan glanced again at the legal deadline printed on the document. 48 hours. A short, humorless laugh escaped him. 6 months. He muttered under his breath. A temporary marriage would satisfy the board. A contract. No emotions. No expectations. Just an arrangement with an expiration date. He picked up the envelope again. The paper was simple, almost cheap, the handwriting neat, but slightly uneven. Whoever wrote it clearly didn't belong in the circles Ethan usually dealt with, which might actually make it perfect. No social climbers. No hidden agendas from elite families. Just a stranger willing to play a role. Ethan reached for his phone and typed the number into the screen. For a moment, he hesitated. This was insane, but losing the company would be worse. He pressed call. The phone rang twice before a soft female voice answered. Hello. There was a brief pause, the faint sound of traffic somewhere on her end of the line. Ethan straightened instinctively, his tone calm and controlled. My name is Ethan Caldwell. I'm calling about the note. Silence followed. Long enough that he wondered if she had hung up. Then the woman spoke again, her voice cautious but steady. I was wondering if someone would eventually call. Ethan walked slowly toward the window, staring out over the glowing skyline. Your note said something about a wife for 6 months. Another pause. Yes, she said. It did. He could hear the slightest hint of a nervous breath on the other end. If this is some kind of joke, Ethan continued, I don't have time for it. It isn't a joke, the woman replied quietly. Her voice carried a strange mixture of determination and uncertainty, like someone standing at the edge of a life-changing decision. Ethan studied the reflection of his own serious expression in the glass. Good, he said evenly. Because I'm looking for someone willing to enter a legal marriage contract. Temporary. 6 months. Full financial compensation. The silence that followed this time felt different. Not hesitation. Surprise. Then the woman spoke again, more softly. All right. Ethan frowned slightly. All right. Yes, she said. I agree. He hadn't expected it to be that easy. In fact, something about the calm certainty in her voice made him uneasy. We'll meet tomorrow morning, Ethan said. City Hall. 10 o'clock. Another small pause. Okay. And your name? He asked. The woman answered after a moment. Sophia. Ethan ended the call and set the phone down slowly. Somewhere in New York City, a complete stranger had just agreed to become his wife. For 6 months. What he didn't know yet was that when the doors of City Hall opened the next morning, the woman walking toward him would make the most controlled man in Manhattan completely forget how to breathe. The morning air outside Manhattan City Hall carried the crisp bite of early winter, the kind that made people walk faster and pull their coats tighter as yellow taxis streamed past Broadway and the sound of distant horns echoed between the tall buildings. Ethan Caldwell stood near the wide stone steps of the historic building, his dark overcoat perfectly tailored, his posture straight and composed, as if this morning were nothing more than another corporate meeting. In reality, he had negotiated billion-dollar deals with less uncertainty than this. His watch read 9:58 a.m. In exactly 2 minutes, he would meet the woman who had calmly agreed to marry him over the phone without asking a single question about his wealth, his company, or even the terms of the agreement. That alone made her different from anyone he had encountered in years. His assistant Daniel stood a few feet away holding a leather folder containing the temporary marriage contract, identification documents, and a neatly prepared envelope with the first payment agreed upon for the arrangement. Everything had been organized overnight with the same precision Ethan applied to every major decision. A contract. 6 months. No emotional complications. Simple. Logical. Safe. Ethan glanced toward the sidewalk where people passed in hurried streams, tourists snapping photos, couples laughing, lawyers in dark suits climbing the steps with briefcases in hand. Somewhere among them was Sophia. The name echoed faintly in his mind. Just Sophia. No last name offered during the call. No explanation of who she was or why she had written that strange note. A gust of wind moved through the plaza, lifting the edges of the American flag above the entrance as Ethan checked the time again. 9:59. Then the heavy wooden doors of City Hall opened slowly. At first, Ethan barely noticed. Dozens of people came and went through those doors every minute. But the moment she stepped outside, something shifted. The world did not stop. The traffic did not freeze. The city continued exactly as it always did. Yet for a brief second, Ethan forgot to move. The woman walking down the marble steps was not what he expected. She wore a simple cream-colored coat that reached just below her knees, the kind someone might buy from a small boutique rather than a luxury designer store. Her dark brown hair moved gently in the cold breeze, catching the pale winter sunlight as she paused at the top of the stairs and looked across the plaza. There was nothing extravagant about her appearance. No heavy jewelry. No expensive handbag. And yet there was something quietly striking about her presence, the kind of natural elegance that could not be manufactured by stylists or fashion houses. Her eyes scanned the crowd until they settled on Ethan. Recognition appeared immediately. She began walking toward him with calm, steady steps. Daniel leaned closer and whispered quietly, "Is that her?" Ethan did not answer. For the first time in a long time, the carefully controlled CEO found himself momentarily speechless. Because the stranger approaching him was not just a woman who had agreed to a contract. She was far more beautiful than the picture his mind had prepared for. And the realization caught him completely off guard. Sophia stopped a few feet in front of him, her breath visible in the cold morning air as she gave a small, polite smile. "Mr. Caldwell?" she asked softly. Ethan blinked once, then straightened slightly, returning to the composed version of himself that the business world knew so well. "Yes," he said. "And you must be Sophia?" She nodded. "Thank you for meeting me." Daniel discreetly handed Ethan the folder. Ethan accepted it, but his attention remained on her face, studying the calm expression, the quiet confidence that seemed strangely out of place for someone about to marry a man she had met less than 24 hours ago. "Before we go inside," Ethan said carefully, "there are a few things we should review." Sophia looked at the folder and then back at him. "The contract?" "Yes." She nodded once. "I understand." Ethan opened the folder slowly, still trying to ignore the unexpected thought forming in the back of his mind. This arrangement had been designed to be simple, but something about the woman standing in front of him suggested that nothing about the next 6 months would be simple at all. Inside City Hall, the warmth of the building wrapped around them as the heavy doors closed behind the morning crowd, muting the sound of traffic outside and replacing it with the quiet echo of footsteps across polished marble floors. The tall ceiling and historic columns gave the space a calm, almost ceremonial atmosphere, as couples waited on wooden benches and clerks moved quietly between offices carrying folders and certificates. Ethan walked beside Sophia toward a quieter corner near a tall window where winter sunlight filtered through the glass. Daniel handed him the leather folder and stepped back respectfully, giving them space. Ethan opened the folder and removed the neatly printed contract, several pages long, the language precise and carefully structured. Sophia stood patiently with her hands folded in front of her coat, her posture calm as if she had been expecting this moment all along. Ethan glanced at her once more before speaking. Before we proceed, you need to understand exactly what this arrangement involves. Sophia nodded slightly. I assumed there would be terms. Ethan held the document between them. This is a legal marriage contract that lasts 6 months from the date of registration today. During that time you will appear publicly as my wife. Her expression remained steady. Public appearances only? Ethan continued reading. You will attend several corporate and social events connected to Caldwell Group. Charity galas, investor dinners, and company functions. In return you will receive financial compensation agreed upon in advance and a private apartment provided by the company for the duration of the contract. Sophia listened carefully without interrupting. Around them a clerk called another couple forward while the sound of a distant elevator bell echoed through the hall. Ethan turned the page. There are boundaries included for both parties. No interference with personal business matters. No expectation of a real marital relationship. And complete confidentiality regarding the nature of this agreement. Sophia lowered her eyes briefly toward the pages before looking back up. So the marriage is only for appearance. Correct. Ethan spoke evenly, the tone he used during boardroom negotiations. When 6 months pass, the contract ends and the marriage will be legally dissolved. No obligations remain between us. For a moment Sophia said nothing. Her gaze moved slowly across the tall room where other couples sat close together whispering quietly, some smiling nervously, others holding hands as if this day meant everything to them. Then she looked back at Ethan. You are very direct about it. Clarity avoids misunderstandings. She gave a small thoughtful nod. That makes sense. Ethan studied her carefully. Most people would have asked dozens of questions by now. They would have wanted guarantees, more money, reassurance, something. Sophia had not asked for any of it. Do you have any conditions you want added? He asked. Sophia hesitated just a second before answering. Just one. Ethan waited. If we are going to do this, she said quietly, then we should do it properly. No embarrassment for either of us. Ethan raised an eyebrow slightly. Meaning, if we appear in public as husband and wife, then we should behave like husband and wife. At least where people can see. Ethan considered that. It was practical. Investors believed what they saw. Agreed. Sophia looked once more at the contract and then extended her hand toward him. Then I accept the terms. Ethan placed the pen into her hand. She signed her name on the final page with steady handwriting. Sophia Bennett. The ink dried quickly against the paper. Ethan signed beneath it moments later. The simple motion felt strangely heavier than any business agreement he had ever completed. Daniel stepped forward and collected the documents before handing Ethan a small velvet ring box required for the ceremony. Ethan opened it and looked briefly at the simple gold band inside. Across the room a clerk called out, "Next couple please." Sophia turned toward the desk and then glanced back at him with a calm expression. "Ready?" Ethan closed the ring box slowly. He had built an empire through careful decisions and controlled risks. But as they walked together toward the clerk's desk, a quiet thought crossed his mind that he could not completely ignore. The contract might have been written to control the next 6 months. But something about Sophia Bennett suggested that this agreement might not follow the rules he had planned at all. The clerk behind the polished wooden counter looked up with a professional smile as Ethan and Sophia stepped forward together, the quiet murmur of other couples filling the large hall, while sunlight streamed through the tall windows behind them. "Names, please," the clerk said calmly while adjusting a pair of thin reading glasses. Ethan placed the signed documents on the counter. Ethan Caldwell and Sophia Bennett. The clerk glanced briefly at the paperwork, stamped several pages with practiced efficiency, and then slid a simple form across the counter. "Please confirm that both parties are entering this marriage voluntarily." Sophia picked up the pen first. Her hand moved smoothly across the page, signing her name again with the same steady confidence she had shown moments earlier. Ethan watched her quietly, noticing the small details he had overlooked before. The way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The calm rhythm of her breathing. Nothing about her suggested panic or hesitation. For someone about to marry a stranger, she appeared surprisingly composed. Ethan signed beneath her name and returned the pen. The clerk nodded once and reached for the small velvet box in Ethan's hand. "Rings." Ethan opened the box and removed the simple gold band, its surface reflecting the soft light of the room. It was not extravagant, just a plain ring purchased quickly that morning to satisfy the legal formality. The clerk gestured gently towards Sophia. Please place the ring. Ethan took Sophia's hand. Her fingers were cool from the winter air outside, but steady as she looked up at him. For a brief second, the surrounding noise faded into the background. This was supposed to feel like a transaction. A contract. Nothing more. Yet the moment held an unexpected weight as Ethan slid the ring slowly onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Sophia glanced down at it with a small, almost thoughtful smile. The clerk spoke again in a warm, practiced tone that had probably repeated this ceremony hundreds of times. Do you both agree to enter this marriage under the laws of the state of New York? Ethan answered first. Yes. Sophia followed softly. Yes. The clerk stamped the final document and placed it neatly into a folder before sliding it across the counter toward them. Congratulations. You are now legally married. The words echoed quietly in Ethan's mind. Married. A word he had carefully avoided for years, now spoken with the finality of law. Sophia looked at the folder for a moment before lifting her gaze toward him again. There was no excitement, no dramatic reaction. Only a calm awareness that something irreversible had just happened. Daniel approached discreetly and handed Ethan his coat while taking the documents for safekeeping. Everything is finalized, he said quietly. Ethan nodded once before turning toward Sophia. We should leave before the press arrives. Sophia raised an eyebrow slightly. The press. News spreads quickly when a CEO suddenly gets married. She gave a small, amused smile. I suppose that means our performance begins immediately. Ethan gestured toward the exit. After you, Mrs. Caldwell. The name sounded unfamiliar even to him. Sophia hesitated for the smallest moment before walking beside him toward the large doors of City Hall. Outside, the cold Manhattan air greeted them again, the street alive with taxis and pedestrians moving through the busy morning. A photographer across the plaza suddenly raised a camera. Daniel sighed quietly. Too late. Flashes of light appeared as the first photos were taken. Sophia instinctively moved closer to Ethan, her hand resting lightly against his arm exactly as a newly married wife might do in public. The gesture was natural, effortless. Ethan glanced down at her with mild surprise before looking forward again, his expression calm for the cameras. Reporters were already gathering across the street, whispers spreading quickly through the small crowd. Somewhere in the distance, someone called his name. Ethan kept walking beside Sophia toward the waiting black sedan. The contract had only been active for less than 10 minutes, yet the world already believed the story completely. And as the car door opened, Ethan realized that for the next 6 months, the stranger beside him was no longer just Sophia Bennett. She was Sophia Caldwell, his wife. The black sedan moved smoothly through midtown Manhattan traffic, the city outside alive with the restless rhythm of late morning as taxis honked and pedestrians hurried across crosswalks beneath towering glass buildings. Inside the car, however, the atmosphere was strangely quiet. Sophia sat beside Ethan in the back seat, her hands folded calmly in her lap, while the simple gold ring on her finger caught the soft light coming through the window. For several blocks, neither of them spoke. The sudden shift from strangers to married couple had happened so quickly that even Ethan, a man accustomed to fast decisions, needed a moment to process it. Finally, he glanced toward her. Your life is about to change very quickly, he said evenly. Sophia turned slightly toward him. I assumed it might. Ethan gave a small nod. The photos taken outside City Hall will reach financial news sites within the hour. By this afternoon, every business publication in the country will know that the CEO of Caldwell Group is married. Sophia considered that quietly before asking. And that is exactly what you needed. Ethan looked forward again as the car stopped briefly at a traffic light. Yes. Across from them, Daniel sat with a tablet already open, scanning headlines that had begun to appear online. He cleared his throat lightly. The first article is already live, he said. Headline says surprise marriage for the city's most private CEO. Sophia smiled faintly at that. Private until today, apparently. Ethan allowed the smallest hint of amusement to appear in his voice. The board will be very pleased. The car turned onto Park Avenue and continued north toward the towering glass headquarters of Caldwell Group. Through the window, Sophia could see the reflection of sunlight on steel buildings, the sidewalks crowded with professionals carrying briefcases and coffee cups. It was a world that looked polished and powerful, very different from the quiet life she had been living only yesterday. Ethan noticed her watching the skyline. "Your apartment will be ready this afternoon," he explained. "It is a furnished residence in a private building a few blocks from my penthouse. Security, driver access, anything you need." Sophia nodded politely. "Thank you." Ethan studied her expression for a moment. "You do not seem overwhelmed." She looked back at him with calm honesty. "I agreed to this knowing things would change. Most people would be asking questions by now. I am sure the questions will come later," she said lightly. The car slowed as it approached a tall glass tower bearing the silver letters Caldwell Group across its entrance. Employees moved in and out through the revolving doors, while security staff stood near the front desk inside. Daniel glanced up from his tablet. "There is already interest from reporters," he said quietly. "Nothing aggressive, but word is spreading." Ethan straightened his coat slightly as the car pulled to the curb. "Then our first appearance as a married couple begins now." The driver stepped out to open the door. Cold air rushed inside as the sounds of the busy avenue returned. Ethan exited first and then turned, offering his hand to Sophia. For a brief second, she looked at his hand, remembering her own words earlier inside City Hall. If they were going to appear as husband and wife, they needed to act like it. She placed her hand gently in his. The movement was simple but natural as she stepped onto the sidewalk beside him. Across the street, a few cameras were already pointed in their direction. Sophia moved slightly closer to Ethan without hesitation, her arm resting lightly against his. Anyone watching would have believed the two had been together for years. Ethan felt the subtle gesture and glanced at her for a moment. She returned a calm, confident look as if reminding him silently of the agreement they had made. The performance had begun. Together they walked toward the entrance of Caldwell Group headquarters, and with every camera flash that followed, the world's newest power couple stepped further into a story that neither of them fully understood yet. The revolving doors of Caldwell Group headquarters turned slowly as Ethan and Sophia stepped inside, the polished marble lobby stretching wide beneath a ceiling of glass and steel where sunlight poured down like a spotlight. The building carried the quiet authority of power. Employees moved quickly across the floor with tablets and briefcases, their voices low and professional. Yet the moment Ethan entered, a subtle ripple passed through the room. People noticed. They always did. But this time the attention was different. It was not just the CEO walking in. It was the CEO and his wife. Sophia felt the shift immediately. Curious glances. Whispered conversations. A few surprised expressions quickly hidden behind polite professionalism. The news had traveled fast. Ethan continued forward with the calm confidence that had made him one of the most respected business leaders in the country, his stride steady, his expression composed. Sophia walked beside him naturally, her hand still resting lightly on his arm. She could feel the cameras from outside were gone now, but the quiet scrutiny inside the building felt even stronger. When they reached the private elevator reserved for executive leadership, the doors opened instantly as security recognized Ethan. Daniel stepped forward and pressed the button for the top executive floor. The elevator doors closed smoothly, sealing them inside a quiet space lined with brushed steel and soft lighting. The sudden silence felt almost surreal after the busy lobby. For a moment, none of them spoke as the elevator began rising. Then Sophia exhaled softly. That was a lot of attention. Ethan glanced at her reflection in the mirrored wall. "You handled it well." She gave a small smile. "I remembered the rule. Husband and wife in public." Ethan nodded slightly. "Yes." Daniel cleared his throat politely while still looking down at his tablet. "To be fair, you both looked very convincing." Sophia laughed quietly at that. The elevator chimed as it reached the executive floor. When the doors opened again, a wide hallway appeared lined with glass offices, modern artwork, and large windows overlooking Manhattan. The skyline stretched endlessly outside like a sea of buildings under the bright afternoon sun. Several senior executives stood near the conference room entrance already waiting. The oldest among them, a tall silver-haired man in a dark navy suit, stepped forward with a polite smile that did not fully reach his eyes. "Ethan," he said smoothly. "Congratulations." Ethan's tone remained neutral. "Charles Whitmore." Charles Whitmore was the vice chairman of Caldwell Group and the man who had pushed hardest for Ethan to prove his stability to the board. His gaze shifted towards Sophia with open curiosity. And this must be the mysterious Mrs. Caldwell. Sophia extended her hand politely. Sophia Caldwell. It is nice to meet you. Charles shook her hand lightly, while studying her with the careful attention of someone who spent his life reading people. Your wedding has certainly surprised everyone. Ethan answered before the moment could stretch too long. It was a private decision. Charles gave a thin smile. Of course it was. Behind him the other executives exchanged subtle glances. News of the marriage had already shifted the balance inside the company. Ethan gestured toward the conference room. The board meeting starts in 5 minutes. Charles nodded and stepped aside. Then let us not keep the directors waiting. As they moved toward the large glass doors of the conference room, Sophia felt Ethan's arm shift slightly beneath her hand. It was a small movement, but deliberate. A silent signal. She tightened her grip just enough to show confidence as they walked together inside. The long conference table was already filled with board members watching them enter. Some faces looked surprised, others impressed, a few skeptical. Ethan paused at the head of the table before speaking calmly. Good afternoon. Before we begin the meeting, I would like to introduce my wife. Sophia stood beside him, calm and composed despite the dozens of eyes now focused on her. In that moment, the contract they had signed only hours earlier had transformed into something far larger. Because this was no longer just a private agreement between two strangers. It had become a statement that would change the future of Caldwell Group. The conference room grew quiet after Ethan's introduction, the long glass table reflecting the afternoon sunlight, while the board members studied the woman standing beside him. Some looked curious, others impressed, but a few faces carried clear skepticism. Sophia felt the weight of their attention but kept her posture steady, remembering the agreement she and Ethan had made only hours earlier. Husband and wife in public. No hesitation. No embarrassment. Ethan rested one hand lightly on the back of the chair at the head of the table and spoke with calm authority. Thank you all for coming. I know today's news was unexpected. A middle-aged woman on the board leaned forward slightly with a polite smile. Unexpected is one way to describe it. Several members chuckled softly. Ethan did not react. My personal life has always been private, he continued, but I believe stability matters to this company. That is why I am pleased to introduce Sophia Caldwell. Sophia gave a small nod of greeting. The woman returned the gesture politely, but the silver-haired vice chairman, Charles Whitmore, leaned back in his chair with a thoughtful expression that revealed little. His sharp eyes moved slowly between Ethan and Sophia, as if studying a complicated puzzle. Mrs. Caldwell, Charles said smoothly, it is a pleasure to meet you. Sophia answered with the same calm confidence she had used all morning. The pleasure is mine. Charles clasped his hands on the table. I must admit the timing is interesting. Ethan's gaze shifted toward him. Interesting how? Charles smiled faintly. The board has been discussing leadership stability for weeks, and suddenly you appear with a wife none of us knew existed. The room fell quiet again. A few board members exchanged glances. Ethan remained perfectly composed. Sometimes life moves quickly. Charles nodded slowly, as if acknowledging the point, though his eyes remained sharp. Yes, it certainly does. He turned towards Sophia again. Tell us about yourself, Mrs. Caldwell. It is always fascinating to learn how two people meet. Sophia felt every person at the table watching her now. The question sounded casual, but she understood what it really was. A test. Ethan had warned her that the board would observe everything. She placed her hands lightly on the table and answered calmly. Ethan and I met through mutual connections. Charles raised an eyebrow slightly. Mutual connections. Sophia gave a small smile. Yes, we both appreciate privacy, which is why we chose a simple ceremony. One of the younger board members nodded approvingly. That is understandable. Charles studied her a moment longer before leaning back again. Well, privacy is rare in this city. Ethan closed the discussion with a calm tone that signaled the meeting should continue. If there are no further questions about my personal life, I believe we have company matters to address. The board shifted their attention to documents and financial reports as the meeting officially began. Sophia remained beside Ethan for several minutes before quietly taking a seat along the side of the room where guests usually observed the discussion. From there, she watched the way Ethan led the room. His voice remained steady as he discussed strategy, investment growth, and international expansion. The board listened carefully, and even Charles Whitmore occasionally nodded in approval at certain points. Nearly an hour passed before the meeting concluded. Chairs moved and papers were gathered as the board members stood. Several approached Ethan with polite congratulations about the marriage. Others greeted Sophia warmly, curious but respectful. Finally, Charles Whitmore approached again, adjusting his cufflinks as he stopped in front of her. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said thoughtfully, "you handled yourself well today." Sophia met his gaze. "Thank you." Charles gave a faint smile that carried just a hint of mystery. "I have spent 30 years watching people in this company. It is amazing what you can learn from first impressions." Sophia did not react, though she understood the meaning beneath his words. Charles glanced toward Ethan across the room before returning his attention to her. "I look forward to learning more about you." With that, he walked away toward the elevator. Sophia watched him leave, a quiet realization forming in her mind. The contract she and Ethan had signed might convince the world that their marriage was real. But inside Caldwell Group, at least one man had already begun looking for the truth. Late afternoon sunlight stretched across the floor of Ethan Caldwell's executive office as the last board members left the conference floor and the quiet of the top level returned. Through the massive glass windows, Manhattan glowed in shades of gold and steel, traffic moving slowly along Park Avenue far below. Sophia stood near the window for a moment, watching the city breathe beneath them. The entire day had passed like a whirlwind. 12 hours ago, she had been an ordinary woman walking into City Hall. Now she stood inside one of the most powerful offices in New York as the wife of a billionaire CEO. The thought felt surreal even to her. Behind her, the door closed softly as Ethan entered the office. He removed his suit jacket and placed it carefully over the back of a chair before walking toward the window beside her. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. The quiet was comfortable but thoughtful, like two people adjusting to a new reality. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "You handled the board very well." Sophia turned slightly toward him. "Your vice chairman does not trust easily." Ethan gave a faint smile. "Charles Whitmore trusts nothing he cannot control." Sophia looked back toward the skyline again. "He is already suspicious." "He always is." Ethan leaned lightly against the edge of his desk. "But suspicion alone will not prove anything." Sophia studied his expression carefully. "You are confident about that?" Ethan shrugged slightly. "This company has survived far worse than curiosity from the board." A soft knock sounded at the office door before Daniel stepped inside, holding a tablet. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, "but there is something you both should see." Ethan gestured for him to continue. Daniel turned the tablet so they could read the screen. Several major financial news outlets displayed the same headline across their websites. Caldwell CEO marries in surprise ceremony. The articles showed photographs taken earlier outside City Hall, and again when Ethan and Sophia entered the headquarters building together. In every image they looked composed, elegant, and convincing as a couple. Sophia studied the pictures for a moment before letting out a small breath of amusement. "We look very believable." Ethan glanced at the photos. "Appearances matter." Daniel scrolled down to another article where reporters speculated about Sophia's background. "This part might become more complicated," he said carefully. Sophia read the paragraph quietly. The reporters were already asking questions. Who was Sophia Caldwell before today? Where did she come from? How did she meet Ethan Caldwell? The media loved mysteries. Sophia handed the tablet back calmly. "Eventually they will find information." Ethan watched her reaction closely. "Is there anything they should not find?" Sophia met his gaze directly. For a brief second, something deeper moved behind her calm expression, a thought she did not fully reveal. Then she answered carefully. "Everyone has a past." Ethan studied her a moment longer, but did not push the question. Instead, he walked toward the window again and looked out at the endless city below. "Tonight, there is a charity gala for the Caldwell Foundation," he said. "It was scheduled long before this morning." Sophia understood immediately. "Our first public event as a married couple." "Exactly." She nodded, once accepting the role without hesitation. Ethan glanced at the simple gold ring still resting on her finger. It had only been there for a few hours, yet somehow it already looked natural. Across the room, Daniel's phone buzzed again with another news alert. The story was spreading quickly. Reporters, investors, analysts, and competitors were all watching the same unfolding headline. Ethan straightened slightly, returning to the calm authority he carried in every public appearance. "The world now believes we are husband and wife," he said quietly. Sophia looked toward the city lights beginning to glow as evening approached. Then we should make sure the world keeps believing it. Neither of them realized that somewhere else in the same building, Vice Chairman Charles Whitmore was already reviewing the same news articles with a very different expression. And the questions forming in his mind were only beginning. The ballroom of the Caldwell Foundation Gala shimmered with soft golden light as crystal chandeliers reflected across polished marble floors, and hundreds of guests moved through the elegant space in quiet conversations. Outside the tall windows, Manhattan glowed against the night sky, the city alive with energy, while inside the evening carried the calm sophistication of one of the most prestigious charity events in New York. Ethan Caldwell stepped through the entrance beside Sophia, cameras flashing immediately as photographers captured their arrival. News of their marriage had traveled across every major media outlet during the day, and now the city's elite had gathered not only for the foundation, but also to see the mysterious woman who had suddenly become Mrs. Caldwell. Sophia moved naturally beside Ethan, her hand resting lightly on his arm, her calm presence matching the elegant navy dress she wore. Several guests greeted Ethan warmly as they entered the ballroom, offering congratulations with polite smiles and curious glances toward Sophia. Ethan handled each conversation with the practiced confidence of someone used to public attention, yet more than once he noticed how easily Sophia adapted to the role beside him. She greeted strangers with quiet grace, listened attentively, and answered questions with thoughtful warmth. To anyone watching, they looked like a couple who had been standing together at events like this for years. Across the room, a familiar figure observed them carefully from beside a tall marble column. Charles Whitmore stood with a glass of sparkling water in his hand, his expression thoughtful as he watched the interactions unfolding across the ballroom. The vice chairman had spent the afternoon studying every detail about Sophia Caldwell that he could find. The results had been frustratingly limited. That alone made him more curious. Near the center of the ballroom, a stage had been prepared for the evening's main announcement regarding a new scholarship initiative funded by the Caldwell Foundation. Ethan was scheduled to speak. When the host invited him to the stage, the quiet music faded and the crowd turned their attention toward him. Ethan walked to the podium with his usual composed authority, pausing for a moment before speaking. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for supporting the mission of the Caldwell Foundation. His voice carried clearly through the elegant room as he explained the new scholarship program designed to support students with exceptional artistic talent who lacked financial resources. As he spoke, Sophia listened from the front row with genuine interest. Art had always been important to her life, and the program described by Ethan felt unexpectedly personal. When the speech ended, applause filled the room. Ethan stepped down from the stage and returned to Sophia. What did you think? He asked quietly. Sophia smiled softly. I think it will change lives. Ethan looked at her thoughtfully. That is the plan. Across the room, Charles Whitmore approached slowly, his gaze moving between them again with quiet calculation. A beautiful speech, he said politely, and a very generous initiative. Ethan nodded once. Thank you. Charles turned to Sophia with a curious smile. You seemed particularly interested in the scholarship program. Sophia met his eyes calmly. Art has always mattered to me. Charles studied her expression for a moment before giving a small, thoughtful nod. Interesting. The orchestra resumed, playing softly as guests returned to their conversations. Ethan and Sophia stood together near the balcony overlooking the glowing city lights. The evening breeze drifted through the open doors, carrying the distant sounds of Manhattan below. For the first time all day, the pace of events slowed. Ethan glanced toward Sophia, and then at the ring on her finger reflecting the light of the ballroom behind them. This morning we were strangers, he said quietly. Sophia looked out at the skyline for a moment before answering. And now the whole world believes we are married. Ethan nodded slightly. For 6 months. Sophia turned toward him, her calm expression thoughtful. 6 months is a long time for two strangers. Ethan considered that statement carefully as the city lights shimmered across the horizon. Neither of them realized yet that the contract they had signed that morning would eventually lead them far beyond the simple agreement they believed controlled their future. Because sometimes the most carefully written contracts are the ones life enjoys rewriting the most.